Good evening, one and all present here. It is my great pleasure to be standing here in front of you for the book launch of The Curse of Gandhari by Aditi Banerjee, and she will talk about her book and we'll have some question answer sessions after that. I would like to call Aditi ji and Nitin to escort her. I would now like to start our program with the blessings of Lord Ganpati, and I request Amulya Bhatt to render a devotional song.
Siddhi-vinayakam Varasiddhi-vinayakam Bhajare re manasa Varasiddhi-vinayakam Bhajare re manasa Varasiddhi-vinayakam Bhajare re manasa Varasiddhi-vinayakam Varadabhaya hasam Varadabhaya hasam Varadabhaya hasam Varijasanadinutam Varadabhaya hasam Varijasanadinutam Varaguruguhasodaram Varaguruguhasodaram Veeraganadipujitam Moshikavahana Modakaparam Bhajanana Varasiddhi-vinayakam Bhajare re manasa Varasiddhi-vinayakam. Thank you.
Thank you, Amulya. It was really mesmerizing. I would now request Sri Nitin Sridhar to introduce the guest and author and about Indic Academy.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. A warm welcome to everyone. Just a short introduction to Indic Academy. I am sure many of the regular attenders of our events already know it, but still for the others, Indic Academy is a non-traditional university for traditional knowledge. We seek to preserve, promote and protect Indic heritage, Indic civilizational knowledge and values, and build a renaissance around it. We have a multi-city presence. We have city chapters in around 20 cities inside India, as well as some few cities in US, UK and other countries. And we regularly conduct talks, book launches, workshops, retreats and other such events to promote Indic knowledge. And we also give grants to various such similar events. Academic grants, non-academic grants, cultural events grants, and so on and so forth. So our vision is to create an Indic ecosystem, create a revival of Indic civilization knowledge systems. Now to introduce our today's speaker, author, Aditi Banerjee. I came across her work first, I think more than around 12-13 years back. She used to write on Sulekha, right? So I did not know her personally then, but I simply enjoyed her writings. It was very thorough but very simple, very attractive, very easily graspable, but very complicated things. She has done a very detailed rebuttal of, the misrepresentations and such things. So I know her from that so many years, I was aware of her work. And personally, we met on, Facebook. And then today it's a social media world. We meet on social media first. And then 2 years back, we finally met in Delhi. Similar Indic Academy event, finally. So, Aditi Banerjee is a practicing attorney at Fortune 500 financial services company. She's currently pursuing executive MBA as executive MBA student at Columbia University. She co-edited the book Invading the Sacreds, an analysis of Hinduism studies in America. So this is a book which documents the misrepresentations of Hindu philosophy and culture in American academia, and they counter and they expose it. She has published several essays on Hinduism and Hindu-American experience in publications such as Columbia Documentary History of Religion in America since 1945 and the Buddhists, Hindus and Sikhs in America, a short history. She earned a Juris Doctor from Yale Law University and received a BA in International Relations, magna cum laude from Tufts University. In her free time, she enjoys wandering the Himalayas. You must read her travelogues, they are wonderful. And this is her first novel, The Curse of Gandhari. I welcome you here, Aditi. About the book, just an introduction before I give the floor to her. It's about the book on the very well-known character from Mahabharata, our own Gandhari. But Aditi dwells deep into Vyasa's Mahabharata and recreates the character, makes her alive, and in a very insightful and sensitive portrayal, she rescues Gandhari from being reduced to mere blindfolded woman to someone who was a bhakta of a Krishna, to someone who found fulfillment in that bhakti. The floor is yours, Aditi. Yeah. So we'll do the book launch and then she will speak. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful to Nitin and Padmavati and Pratyasha for hosting this and for being so gracious. Actually, Indic Academy has been a great support for me. As Nitin was mentioning, about 2 years ago we met at a workshop held by Vishwa Adluri and Joydeep Bagchi on the Mahabharata, and that workshop itself inspired so many thoughts in me that also influenced the novel. And then Indic Book Club, Indic Academy really tries to support budding writers. So there were classes that I took, some with Pratyasha on writing and all of that. Without that inspiration, I may not have written this. So I thought I would start by talking about what Veda Vyasa's Mahabharata actually says about Gandhari. Because Gandhari is, unlike Draupadi and Kunti, she's not very much discovered or she's not very much discussed. So a lot of times the question I get asked is, why write about her? So in the Mahabharata itself, the critical edition of the Mahabharata, this is the story of Gandhari that we have. We know that Bhishma himself asked for her hand for marriage to Dhritarashtra. And we know that when Gandhari heard about this, at the time of her marriage, she blindfolded herself. And we know that when she came to Hastinapur, her brother Shakuni accompanied her there. And after leaving her there, he and the others went back. Then the next significant incident that we're told about is that Gandhari actually is the first. Between her and Kunti, she's the first to become pregnant between the two queens. But Yudhishthira is born first before Gandhari gives birth. And what is told in a very striking passage is that when Gandhari hears that Kunti has given birth, she is so overcome with emotion and with feeling that she strikes her belly, and she strikes her belly so hard that the fetus is expelled from her body. And at that time, it's just a mass of lumpen flesh that is then divided under Vedavyasa's instructions into the 101 parts that become her 100 sons and one daughter. It is also said that at the time of Gandhari's confinement, which was 2 years, she was waiting to deliver for approximately at least 2 years, that during this time Dhritarashtra also sired another son, an illegitimate son with another woman, Yuyutsu, who actually became an ally of the Pandavas. Then there's another, the next significant incident that happens is when Krishna comes for his last attempt at diplomacy before the war begins. They're trying to stop Duryodhana from going to war. And nothing is working. No one can get through to him. And at that moment, they actually call Gandhari to come to the assembly and to address her son. And this, for a few pages, there's a very eloquent speech given by Gandhari when she counsels Duryodhana on the futility of this war. And she says there's no way he can win this war, and that winning the kingdom, winning fame and riches is not worth anything if he does not have dharma and if he's not on the side of goodness. It's a very beautiful discourse on dharma, and from that itself you can tell how learned and intelligent Gandhari was, how strong a queen she could have been. But at the end of that, her son does not listen to her, and the war commences. One of the famous stories that Gandhari is known for is that she told Duryodhana to appear before her naked so that she could look upon him and protect him with her gaze. That actually is not in the critical edition version of the Mahabharata, but that's one of the famous stories associated with her. The next thing that happens is when the war is over and all her sons, including Duryodhana, have died, Gandhari has, she's taken to she has a supernatural vision, a divine vision of the battlefield. And she can see all of the corpses on the field. And again, the Mahabharata spends several pages where she just recounts the soldiers lying on the field. She names them, and she laments the wives who have been widowed and the mothers who have lost their sons. And she lays this on Krishna's shoulders. She's talking to Krishna. It's actually her saying this to Sri Krishna. And then she says, Krishna, you could have prevented this war if you had wanted to. We are helpless, but you could have stopped this from happening. But you did not. And at that moment, she curses Krishna that in 36 years, just as we all have lost, our families have been broken, the Vrishnis and the clan of Krishna will destroy themselves. And of course, that happens to come true later. But Krishna actually accepts that curse with a smile. But then he also points out to Gandhari all the ways in which she herself, he reminds her of what she had said to Duryodhana about dharma, and that he was not on the side of dharma, and that therefore this was just the workings of karma, and that she should understand that. And that's basically all that is said about Gandhari in the Mahabharata. It's said that after the war, 12 years after the war, Dhritarashtra no longer wanted to stay in the court at Hastinapur. And so he and Gandhari decided to go to the forest. Kunti joined them, and so did Sanjaya, who was his charioteer. And then all that is said is that a few years later, there had been a forest fire, and in that fire, they had all passed away. The other thing that is said about Gandhari is her piety was so strong that she had gotten a boon from Shiva himself that she would bear 100 sons. This was before she was married. And then Vedavyasa himself also blessed her with the same boon. So this is just the structure of Gandhari that's given in the Mahabharata. And for me, from childhood, I was always fascinated by her. And for me, the moment she blindfolded herself so she could not see what her husband could not see was so inspiring. I thought, it's such an act of devotion and loyalty and sacrifice. I admired that. And then as I grew older and I started learning more about the character, I thought about what a woman of strength and iron willpower she was, that when she heard about Kunti giving birth, she struck her belly, and it was so hard that she basically gave birth or delivered the fetus in that way. And for someone to have the tapobala where she could curse Bhagavan himself, there must have been something very amazing about her character. On the other hand, she was not able to influence her husband and her sons to act in furtherance of dharma. And in that way, she's an interesting contrast to someone like Kunti, who also had a very difficult job uniting the 5 brothers as the Pandavas and keeping them together and united, but she was able to succeed. So Gandhari to me was a more tragic character because she had that nobility in herself. She understood what dharma was, but she was not able to impart that to the family members closest to her. And then it also seems in the reading between the lines of the Mahabharata that there was this great bitterness and regret within her. So it talks about after the war is over, Yudhishthira appears in front of her, and just through the mere corner of her eye behind the blindfold, she can see a part of his feet. And there's so much anger and bitterness within her that at her mere sight, his toenails turn black. And Yudhishthira becomes frightened and he actually steps back. But this is the kind of tapobala and strength within her. And then what interested me is, so the Mahabharata itself is not judgmental. It doesn't tell us what to think of the different characters and personalities. But people are very judgmental. So nowadays there's a lot of so-called feminist interpretations, and I would hear different interpretations that when Gandhari blindfolded herself, it was not really an act of devotion. It was an act of revenge or spite or martyrdom, and it was her passive-aggressively reacting to a situation where she could not control who her husband would be. And then the other thing that I would hear is that, well, in that situation, she could have been the eyes and ears for Dhritarashtra, and if she had not blindfolded herself, she could have been more powerful, and with her senses, perhaps she could have been a better mother to her sons, and maybe prevent the war from happening. And when I started this book, the original thing that I started with was I wanted to answer this question, the question of her blindfold and what it meant. But I think anytime you write a book, if in the process you yourself as a writer do not discover something new, then the book hasn't really achieved its purpose. And one of the things as I started exploring the character of Gandhari was how nuanced and complex her character was, and that it was really unfair to reduce her to the symbolism of her blindfold. That was much more meaningful than that. And I also think that it wasn't just an act of revenge or bitterness, because if that was the case, then she would have just been a hypocrite, and then she wouldn't have had the tapobala to protect her son with immortality or to curse Sri Krishna. She just would have been a spiteful woman. So that was one thing. And so in the process of writing this book, I got about halfway through, and then I couldn't figure out how to actually finish the book or where to take her character. And I remember I met with my Diksha Guru one afternoon, and I was explaining to him, this is the story I'm trying to write, and this is kind of where I am. And he had said just one line to me, but that line really stuck with me. He said, Gandhari was an extraordinary woman. Even Sri Krishna had so much respect for her. And then when I thought about it, I thought that's true. For someone that earned the respect of even Sri Krishna, there must be something very great about her, even while there's something tragic about her. So that was the kind of ethos or the North Star I tried to keep as I wrote this story. And the other thing that I was trying to do with this is because I felt I have always had this fascination and attraction toward Gandhari, is I think it was such a, in some ways her story was so tragic. She was someone who I think really could have been a great queen, who understood dharma, who had nobility in her character, but she was stuck in a difficult situation where she was surrounded by people who were wicked or weak. And in that situation, she had little influence over them. And it just seemed like she could never quite rise above her circumstances. And so what I want to see is there any way, and this is where there's some creative liberties, where she could have found some kind of peace or reconciliation at the end of her life. And also this relationship between her and Sri Krishna, and whether there was a way he could have helped her find that peace. So ultimately, that's what the book was about, and that's kind of the journey that it goes through. So starting from that skeleton that's there in Vedavyasa's Mahabharata, I kind of imagined her girlhood growing up in the kingdom of Gandhara, her relationship with Subala, her father, her brother Shakuni, who of course has a pivotal role in the story. And then when she comes to Hastinapur, her experience, her rivalry with Kunti, her relationship with Satyavati, who again was a very strong, powerful, pragmatic woman, her relationship with Pandu, with her husband, and trying to explore these different facets of her character. And in doing so, I was very nervous about one thing, which is, for me, like the Mahabharata, like all the Itihasa and the Puranas, it's a sacred text. And it was very important to me to stay true to the original ethos and worldview of the Mahabharata and to the essence of her character. So that was something I really tried to do, and that was important to me. And so that was really kind of the book I set about trying to write. So I think I'll pause there. And then I thought, being especially with Nitin here, it would be nice to have maybe some, like a dialogue or something like that, or if there are any questions or comments, happy to address those too.
Aditi ji and Nitin between them. If you have any more questions, you can pass on the questions as well.
So you have kind of already answered this question, but I thought you can elaborate on it. So why Gandhari? What made you choose her? I mean, you are working on this book for some 2 years, right? So when you started, or when you decided that you want to write this book, or a book on Mahabharata, or a character on Mahabharata, I mean, what was the thought process? I mean, why Gandhari specifically, or you always wanted to do Gandhari, or it so happened that you finally decided it like that?
So she has always been one of my favorite characters, and I think what I like about her, or what draws me to her, is because she is complicated. You can't pigeonhole her as being good or bad. She's clearly not a conventional heroine, yet she's also not like a villainess. So she's somewhere in the middle, and I think that's pretty rare in our literature, because where women are usually either very virtuous and heroic, or they're like a rakshasi. So I think to have someone of that complexity and nuance was very interesting to me. And also someone of that just incredible depth of willpower and strength. And then I also think for someone in her situation, like even in today's world, I think as women we can relate, and maybe you find yourself in unfortunate circumstances, or where the people who surround you may not be aligned with you, but and what you do in that situation. So I think the Mahabharata is all about dharma and finding dharma in very difficult situations where there are competing priorities or things like that. So I think in that way she's still very relevant today. And the other thing that I think is just so I think it's easy to imagine that Gandhari would not have been happy about marrying Dhritarashtra. He was a blind prince. He was never going to inherit the throne. And in the Mahabharata, he also comes across as being at best weak-willed, at worst something more nefarious. But that in spite of that, actually the Mahabharata says that from the moment she knew she would marry Dhritarashtra, she never thought of another man. So this pativrat that she had, this devotion and loyalty to someone that, who did not really live up to those standards, I think again is just speaks strongly to her character. So that was also something that was important.
That's wonderful. So the Mahabharata specifically mentions that she was devoted to her husband throughout the life, right? So in your book, in Vyasa Bharata also this blindfolding happens immediately before coming to Hastinapur itself?
Yes, it's... I can't remember the exact passage, but it says as soon as she hears about it, I think it's before the marriage actually happens.
Okay. So you made an interesting comment about how we should interpret the blindfolding act as her devotion to her husband, and she never thought about anybody. So this shows her pativrata. This is a very interesting concept to me, because today this concept of pativrata is completely, the feminists and the leftists, the whole narrative is against the whole notion of pativrata stri. But if you take the Dharma Shastras and all, this is a very important concept. So if when I think about Gandhari, and I was thinking on the aspect of pativrata dharma. So while she was devoted to her and that aspect of Pativrata Dharma is fulfilled, but also Pativrata Dharma means Sahadharmacharini. So can we see that she failed in this aspect by blindfolding herself? Because if she could have been, as you said, the eyes and ears of Dhritarashtra, and she could have, if not blindfolded, she could have controlled her sons better, she could have guided them better, she could have even guided the husband better in the ways of Dharma, which she definitely knew. So in a sense, her blindfolding vow prevented her from doing the Pativrata Dharma in a fuller sense. What are your comments on this?
So I think it's very easy to take that view, and that was my view kind of going into the story. But when you read it, the Mahabharata itself seems to really admire her for this blindfolding. So like I said, that seems to be the source of her tapobala, and like Veda Vyasa also admires her. She's kind of described as being this very devoted wife. So I think the Mahabharata takes that view, but it also it doesn't explicitly says that, but I think it implicitly raises this question, which is, but would she have been better if she'd done it the other way? So in one sense, you have this power or the strength that comes from sacrifice. And then on another side, if she had not done so, there would have been power and strength she would have gathered through her purushartha. Which would have been better in those circumstances? And then I found that that's actually, for me, that was an impossible question to answer. And I think it's that once she made, even blindfolded, I think she still could have been a better queen. She still could have been intelligent. She could have been perhaps more active and adamant when Shakuni was there to counter him, or perhaps she could have tried. And I think it's also difficult in those circumstances, in that time and place, how much of a role did she actually have where she could have, let's say, banished Shakuni from the court, or really taken a stronger role as a woman in those times. But I think the blindfold itself did not prohibit her from being a more active queen, mother, and wife. I think part of that was her own feeling of being helpless in those circumstances.
Can we think about, she kind of turned away from the world, turned inside and into her sadhana and tapasya and all, but at the same time she was not fully free from the attachments to the world. So this kind of caused a lot of problems. She could not perform her worldly duties to the best of her ability, perhaps. But at the same time, though she made a individual progress in the sadhana, still she was attachment was also there.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, because clearly that's there. Otherwise, she wouldn't have had this bitterness where like she blackened Yudhishthira's toenails and things like that. And so there is this. So I think there is that question, and again, I think this is why this is relevant for a lot of women nowadays, who, when we find ourselves in bad, difficult circumstances, we may think we just may want to like martyr ourselves, or else passive aggressively, resign ourselves to the fate, but inside we can't let it go. And then is it better, can you somehow either rise above that internally or externally do things differently? So I think that's definitely part. I think that's one of the questions raised by her character, and that ambiguity is always there.
So as I was reading the first few chapters of your book, one thing that struck me was a huge similarity between Bhishma and Gandhari. In a similarity in the sense there were completely different people, but there is one in their character arcs in the Mahabharata. Both of them made a very Bhishma vow. Bhishma got his name because of that vow, and Gandhari's very character, the blindfolding kind of a defined her, turned her life forever. So, and both of them, if today, I mean, if we are seeing from a outside and neutral perspective today, in kind of trying to judge them for our own purpose, not in the sense of judging their life or decisions, but more in the sense of what can we learn from the Dharma Sankata situation. Because clearly both of them were in a Dharma Sankata situation. She was getting married to a person she had no liking, a blind king, and Bhishma was suddenly asked to renounce everything. So, and both of them took a very great vow. But now, retrospectively speaking, the whole Mahabharata war, we can squarely blame on Bhishma to begin with, and secondly on Gandhari. If only they both decided to break their vows. Bhishma may not have been a Bhishma if he had broken his vow, but still the Kuru lineage would have survived. A better king, a true king, in a sense, a true heir could have been there, who would have completely avoided the war. What do you think about this?
And actually there is I think it's a dialogue between Shri Krishna and Arjuna where this is actually explained, and I think Krishna is the one who actually says that that old man, because of this vow and not deviating from that vow, all of this has happened. And I think the Mahabharata points to both sides. One is just the power of the vow, and when Bhishma takes his vow, like flowers fall from the sky. It's admired and it's respected. But I think that's where the Mahabharata, because it shows both sides. So it also shows that other side where, because he refused to deviate from that vow, even when Satyavati asked him to, then everything else followed from that. And same you could say of Gandhari. And I think the lesson from that is to be very careful when you take a vow, because when you take it for that moment, you cannot imagine all of the consequences that will come from that. And so I think one of the things is being wary of when and how to take a vow and then sticking to that. I think there is a respect for, once you've taken the vow, of sticking to that vow. But there is a cost to that. There's a cost that Bhishma and Gandhari paid, and then there's a cost that the kingdom paid. And I think one of the questions for Bhishma is, at that moment as a prince, was the higher dharma to his father because he wanted to marry Satyavati, or was it to the kingdom for whom he was the crown prince? And that's a conflict there. And I think the same you could ask also of Gandhari for the reasons you mentioned earlier.
I think the Shantanu's desire itself to get married at that age could be questioned on the basis of dharma at the cost of the kingdom. Yes. So that's an interesting, never-ending discussion. I remember how dharma is sukshma ati sukshma. Yes. It's very difficult. Yes. So the next question is, Mahabharata have so many strong women characters. There is Kunti, there is Draupadi, obviously, but there are also other minor characters like Madhavi, the most abused in the West, Western academia, and there are many other characters. So, how do you see Gandhari different from others? Because clearly, even Kunti had no character in Mahabharata is full white or full black. Perhaps except for Krishna, we can say, who is beyond the white and black, all people on the realm were mixture, including Yudhishthira. So, how do you see this, compared to Gandhari, compared to, say, Kunti or Draupadi?
I think it's different. So, for example, even though Gandhari is admired, or for her vow, let us say, but she's not like one of the Panchakanya. She's not held up as someone who should be followed or revered in that sense. So I think she's there as someone, you can say she's very admirable in certain respects, but she's also there as like a cautionary tale. So I think she's kind of somewhere in between. And I think that's how I would place her in that continuum. I think Draupadi is clearly, she's the catalyst of the war. She's on the side of Dharma. She's the one who makes her husbands, who wakes them up and instigates them to do the dharmic thing. She's clearly like a heroine. Kunti, again, with what happens with Karna or other instances, you can say it's not black and white. But I think without Kunti, like the Pandavas would not have stayed together. It's because she understands the importance of them being united. She adopts her co-wife's 2 sons and treats them as her own. When she sees that all of her sons desire Draupadi, she makes sure that all of them marry her, so there's no conflict among them. So I think she's held up as one of a heroine in the sense of keeping the Pandavas together and keeping them on the side of Dharma. I think Gandhari is more complex than that. It's just not at the same level.
Listening to you, one thought just came to me. We can characterize Gandhari's character as, the path of tapas or tapas shakti, whereas Kunti was kind of a karma yogi, in the world, keeping the family together, and, she was not doing any special tapasya other than this, that was itself, but for Gandhari it's a complete tapasya, bhakti, and such path. That just struck me.
That's interesting, because even Kunti's boon comes from Durvasa when she's serving him in karma yoga. She's like looking after him and things like that, versus herself doing like penance or puja.
So now let's move on from the particular book, The Curse of Gandhari, to your life. So how was growing up in US? You're born in US itself, right? So as a Hindu, how was the journey? Were you always kind of rooted, or I keep you keep reading stories of people who become, especially who are born in the West, become kind of derooted and then rediscovering their roots. So do you have a story like rediscovery, or your story is more always of a
Yes. So growing up, I didn't have any background to traditional Hinduism. What had happened is, I think when I was about 10 years old or so, we were cleaning my brother's room, and in this shoebox there was a small picture of Krishna. And it belonged to my brother. And he said, "Oh, I don't want that." And I saw that picture and I was so attracted to it. I said, "No, I want it." And then I kept it in my room. And from then I had this attraction to Krishna. And as a child, my brother and we would come to India every year in the summer to spend time with our grandparents. At that time, I would see the Mahabharata on TV. So I had some osmosis of that through that. But I remember the first time when I was about 13 years old, we had gone to Vrindavan. And going to Vrindavan had just transformed me, and Krishna is real, and I could feel that. So that was kind of what started my journey. And at that time, there wasn't so much of an internet where you could look up and, I want to learn about Krishna. So I really wanted to read the Srimad Bhagavat. But it was impossible to find a good English translation other than Prabhupada's from ISKCON. So I would go to the library, to bookstores, and I would look up books on Hinduism. And it was always like Western, very anti-Hindu books. So if there was a book on the Ramayana, the first page would be about how Rama was terrible and all of this bad thing. So there was nothing that was either neutral or positive or written from a Hindu perspective in English that I could easily find. So like I would read the Mahabharata by Sri Raja Gopalacharya, which is very small. And I always wanted to read the full one. So I had this kind of thirst, but it was very difficult to find unbiased information. So like when I was in high school, I took a class on ancient India, ancient Indian history. I was excited, like, oh, now I'll finally learn something. And then my teacher came in and said, oh, like there's this newspaper article about this plane landed in some remote village in India, and the people came out and they worshipped the plane, and oh, these people are so strange. So this kind of bias and discrimination was there through the education system. And as Indians, we're taught to revere and respect our teachers and not question them. So it's very difficult for me to learn my own heritage, even though I wanted to. But I think also this struggle made me more aware of the value of it, and also more passionate about learning about it and trying to promote it. So for me, it's been a journey and a struggle, but it's only made me more rooted in it.
Share with us about your first book, that you edited, the Invading the Sacred. So I understand it's basically written on the Hindu phobia in the Western academia, the school textbooks and other things, right? Can you shed some light on that? Sure.
So I remember when I was in college, I had taken some basic courses about Hinduism. And this is just Hinduism 101. So this is something anyone in college goes to learn something basic. If you go to a class about Islam or Buddhism or anything, it's always very positive. But this class on Hinduism, when we were taught the Ramayana, we weren't even taught anything about the story. It was just, oh, this is a conflict between the Aryans and the Dravidians. And it was all about this kind of racist reading of the Ramayana. And this isn't a graduate course. This is 18-year-olds are going to this class. And it was very discouraging because instinctively I knew it was wrong, but I had no evidence for it, nor could I say where my professor was coming from. So I remember it was between my college and law school days, I started discovering the writings of Rajiv Malhotra on this. And what was brilliant about what he did was he made everything systematic. So he talked about where this Hindu phobia comes from, that there is this coterie of Western scholars and intellectuals linking it back to the colonial times and how everything worked now and how systematic it was. And that was great for people like me because then we had some support and foundation to say, yes, this is wrong and this is why it is wrong. So even in that class, for example, I had heard this thing from Jeffrey Kripal about Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, who I had grown up revering, that they had some kind of inappropriate relationship because Sri Ramakrishna was treating Swami Vivekananda like a lover or something like that. It's just rubbish. But when you learn something in school, it just seems like, oh, it's official, this must be true. So it shakes you, and unless you have the background and someone else to say, no, this is where, this is the mistranslation and things like that, then you don't have the ammunition to fight back. And so what I appreciated about what Rajiv and others that he was working with were doing was going and not just saying this is wrong or it's anti-Hindu, but these are the actual mistranslations from Bengali into English. Some of these professors, they don't even know what Bengali is, or they and Sanskrit, and this is where they're just importing things from European history or other things. So just having that helped give the confidence to me and to others that we can learn our heritage, ourselves, without these intermediaries who are not qualified to be teaching us about ourselves.
Wonderful, wonderful. One last question I have is, for example, your book is based on Mahabharata. And today, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, especially Ramayana, comes up in controversies and discussions every other day. So we have different schools of thought. One who want to, historicize the text completely, and the other side who wants to completely, discard it as a mythology. And somehow I feel, our Indian terminology like itihasa is more nuanced than either calling it as history or as mythology, or legend for that matter. So while working in these books, and even lot of retellings in that is coming up, lot of people approach these texts in a historical manner, like what was the historical condition at the in fiction novels I am speaking, what was the historical condition like that, so we should portray such historical condition. So in your opinion, what is the best way to approach this text? Should we take Mahabharata and Ramayana as manuals of history, or more nuanced way as a documents of our civilizational structure, something that has documented the entire culture, or the essence of our cultural complex, documented cultural complex. So what is your opinion on this?
So I think there is some space for, you can learn certain things about history from reading the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, but fundamentally they're not historic documents, because if you were to say so, then they're limited in time to like something of the past period. But the function of the Itihas and the Puranas is really to take the Vedas and bring it to the general population and make it real and tangible for us. So if you look at it as a historical document, then I think you kind of demean or limit the importance and the relevance of it. And I think also our vision, the dharmic vision of reality, is not a historic-centric one. So for us, reality is beyond time and space. So Krishna is real not whether he lived 5,000 years ago or not, but because if I sit in Upasana or if I listen to Krishna, he becomes a real presence before me. I have a real relationship with him. That's the reality of Krishna. And then it doesn't matter what happened 5,000 years ago or whatever, because when you have that experience and the direct anubhava, it is real and it has a real transformation for you. And when you open the Mahabharata, if you think of it as a book, as of something that happened in the past, then you lose out on something. For me, every time I open the Mahabharata, it's real, it's living. Gandhari is still like a living presence. It's not just some historical character, because in that case, why should it matter what someone lived 5,000 years ago to me now? But instead, the Mahabharata is really about, I think it still has such a grip on us. So all of our literature, our movies, and things like that still reflect those themes. And it's because it's so universal. And the real relevance for it is for the Mahabharata specifically, is learning what is dharma. And dharma for the Kali Yuga, because this is like Krishna is actually ushering in the Kali Yuga, when there aren't clear heroes or clear villains, where there's a lot of gray, and how do you live a dharmic life in that situation? So I think that's how you have to approach the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. It's fine to glean some historical things from them, but that's not their ultimate purpose. And we shouldn't become so distracted by that that we actually lose sight of what the importance and the relevance is.
I remember Vishwa Adluri saying that the text is a universe, and there is an avatarana of Bhagavan into the text itself. So it is the Rama or Krishna who makes the text real, perhaps much more real than our day-to-day reality, and not the historical facts or the historical event aspect of it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I open the floor to the questions from the audience. If there are any questions, please do ask.
Listening to you, my name is Arvind Deshpande. I am a retired person. I am a retired engineer here. I just wanted to know whether you have been able to lay your hands on the book Parva by Mr. S.L. Bhairappa, which talks about Mahabharata? And if the answer is yes, then was there any usefulness, if at all, in the writing of this book?
But curious to hear your thoughts, if you'd like to share any.
See, Mr. S.L. Bhairappa is an author who has settled down in Mysore, and he has written a number of books. One of his famous books is Parva, which is based on the Mahabharata. And he brings to life all the characters there. So it would have been, in my opinion, may not be everybody's opinion, it would have been interesting if you could have read that part of the book in order to use it as one more source of information before writing this book. However, now having written this book, I will still urge you to see whether you can read that, because that is one of the books which has been translated into English. Thank you.
Read the book.
Firstly, I'm a little sorry I came walked in a little late.
No problem.
Okay, because I usually come in time and the program doesn't start in time. So today I am late, it started in time. Anyway, my question to you is, I'm sure you must have done a lot of research during your course of writing this book. So have you ever come across any, any material which talks about the relationship between Gandhari and Karna anywhere?
Gandhari and Karna?
Yeah. Because I'm very much interested in Karna, I like to read a lot about him. So, have you ever come across any book or any research material which talks about her relationship with Karna? How was it?
Yes, no, for me, my main source of research was really the critical edition of the Mahabharata, because I wanted to immerse myself into Veda Vyasa's ethos and worldview. So that's what I kind of really focused on. I do think it's an interesting relationship, and actually in my book I have a little bit between the relationship between Gandhari and Karna, but that's more based on, I would say, somewhat my imagination, but also just kind of this understanding of both of their characters through Veda Vyasa's Mahabharata.
Thank you.
Madam, I have one conflict. Krishna in the Mahabharata, he is fought for the upliftment of justice and anyaya, dharma. In spite of that, Gandhari curses him. I felt very bad regarding this. Gandhari, did she know that Krishna is fighting for justice?
I think to put it in context, because there is that part that I mentioned earlier where Gandhari is counseling her son not to fight the war. And every time she blesses Duryodhana, she always says, victory will go where dharma is. And she's so learned in her exposition of dharma. And I think she knows that Krishna is on the side of dharma and that her sons have no chance against Krishna. I think she understands that. But yet there's the pathos of a mother who has lost 100 sons, who sees the battlefield. And if you ever read the description in the Mahabharata, it describes that the corpses are broken in half. And they're so dismembered that you cannot even tell which head belongs with which body. Just identifying the corpses is so difficult. All the vultures are circulating. It's a very graphic description. So imagining that someone who has not seen anything for decades and this is what she is seeing, I think any person would be overcome at that moment. And then she sees Krishna, who is all-powerful, who knows everything. And she must have thought in that moment, if he wanted to, he could have stopped this or he could have prevented it. And in a sense, that's true. What's beyond the powers of Shri Krishna? But he had another purpose. It was ushering in Kali Yuga. The great heroes of the time had to go. So I think that moment when she curses him, it's not so much that she's fighting against Shri Krishna. I think it's just she's overcome at that moment. Part of it is her as a mother, as a queen who's been defeated. But part of it is someone that anyone would feel it's a great, terrible war that really decimates the kingdom. I think anyone would feel the tragedy of that. And I think that's what she's voicing at that moment, versus judging or condemning Sri Krishna as a person in a karmic sense.
Listening to you. Actually, even I was wondering, like, the Curse of Gandhari, the name itself struck me, and today we had a lot of answers to that questions, actually. Now I would like to thank the Indic Academy, Shri Hari Kiran ji, who has been the source of energy for doing all these programs here. And I would like to thank Institute of Engineers, the photographers and the videographers, Rajendra, sound system by Hebar, and our media fraternity, and one and all present here. Thank you for being here. I know this is a weekday and many of you could not attend, but still most of them have come down. Thank you a lot.